Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch discussion video, and today we're going to have a look at the subject of what is the best entry-level Rolex. This is a question that I get asked all the time. So when I'm saying entry-level, I mean like the most affordable Rolex in the collection. Because you could technically enter the collection at any level. You know, you could, maybe your first Rolex would be a rose gold Daytona, depends on your financial position. But when I say entry level in this video, I mean the most affordable ones. So the price point I'll go up to is starting at just under £4,000, and it's going to go up to around the £6,500 mark. So I'm going to go through the different watches and say why I like them, and then at the end I'll say my top 3 entry level Rolexes and why. So starting with the Oyster Perpetual 36mm, which is £3,950 retail price here in the UK. And that's another point I'm going to make, is I just assume that you're buying each of these watches at retail price, because it's too difficult for me to go through and find some market value on these watches, because they are steel Rolexes and those are the most desirable ones. So the Oyster Perpetual is a real staple piece in the Rolex collection. I often find it actually is a little bit overlooked, especially now that everyone has their attention on like the sports watches, the more common sports watches like the Daytona and the Submariner and the GMT. I find that often the Oyster Perpetual is kind of overlooked, whereas a few years ago that was one of Rolex's main sellers. I love the proportions of this watch. I think it's such a pretty looking watch. I think it's a lot of watch for the money. You know, surprising, I don't know, relative to other watches in the industry, but £3,950 for a steel Rolex is, you know, very, very good value. Personally, I'd get this watch either with the steel dial, the white dial, or the black dial, but I probably think the best of those is maybe the white, because watches nowadays tend to be much bigger than 36mm, so that white dial will help to make the watch look a little bit bigger. I think if you go for a black, it may look too small relative to today's standards. But I really like the steel dial. I love that sort of sunburst effect. I think it's a really cool looking piece. I love the way it sort of blends in with the bracelet and the case. Yeah, it's a really smart looking watch. I really like the simplicity and elegance of the Oyster Perpetual. And for me, it's just such an iconic Rolex look. If you have it on that white dial, that is such a nice watch to wear every day. As I said before, I think it's kind of overlooked in the collection. I think they are really, really nice watches. The next watch we're going to have a look at is the Oyster Perpetual 39. So it's the slightly bigger version of the 36 we just looked at. And the retail price on that one is £4,150. Again, assuming you can buy it direct from Rolex. I personally prefer the proportions on the 36mm. I think the 36 just looks a little bit more refined. It kind of suits the case a little bit more. It's got a little bit more depth than the 39mm in terms, well, relative to the whole case design, because obviously the case is smaller on the 36. In this watch, I prefer the black dial purely because I think this watch wears much bigger than 39mm. It's quite a flat looking piece, this one, and it definitely has got a much bigger presence on the wrist versus the 36mm. Something that I really like about these Oyster Perpetuals is they have a full brushed bracelet, and I think that's really good for everyday use. I personally prefer that less shiny look that versus what you get from a polished Centerlink watch like a GMT or something. I really like the nice, clean, elegant look to this watch. Again, both very simple like the 36. The 39 is also very clean design. There's no date window, you've just got your large indexes and a very simple 3-hand dial. I think it's a really, really nice classic piece that will never ever go out of fashion. That's always going to be relevant in the collection. Again, also 39mm in my opinion is an overlooked watch, the Oyster Perpetual. I think the best options for this watch is either the white dial, the black dial, or the dark rhodium. I really like the rhodium because it's got those blue little markers around the dial. I think that adds like a little pop of color to the watch, adds a little bit more interesting appearance to the piece versus just a plain color. The white is really nice, but I personally think the black is the best for this watch because the watch wears so big anyway. I think the black helps to make the watch look a little smaller on the wrist. Most people will go for the 39mm over the 36mm, but personally I definitely prefer the 36. I think the proportions are really nice. Next is the Air King. And the Air King actually has a case that I absolutely love. I love that the proportions of that case, the dimensions of it, I think look amazing. It's 40mm, so it's slightly bigger than the 2 other watches we looked at. but I just love the design of this case. I think it just wears so nicely. I think it perfectly proportioned, everything really complements each other. The thing that holds people back about this watch, because it's actually not very popular in the collection, not many people buy the Air King. 20 or so years ago they were much more popular, but now they're not. So I think the dial probably puts people off because it's such a busy, sporty dial. Personally, I quite like it. I'm not sure if I would have this as my only watch though. I think you've really got to love that really busy dial. For me, it looks like an older Rolex. I love that sort of original older look or retro Rolex look to it. You've got that green logo and the green hand and those big numbers. To me, it really looks like a vintage Rolex. So for people that appreciate that older style or older design on the Rolexes, then I think this watch is a great watch. And at £4,550, it's a lot of watch for the money. Next watch is pretty similar to this one, and that is the Explorer 1, which comes in at £4,800. This is one of my favorite watches in the Rolex collection. I love this watch. It is a slightly more toned down version of the Air King that we just looked at. It's a much simpler looking piece. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of those numbers, the 3, 9 and 6. And I like the indexes to be slightly smaller than they are on this watch. But 39mm wears really nicely. I don't think the case proportions are as nice as the Air King, but it is a really nice, elegant, classic watch that will never ever go out of fashion. You can wear it at any occasion. It goes with absolutely everything. And that black dial really does dress it up a little bit, makes the watch look pretty smart. And then you've obviously got your numbers and your white accents on the dial, which make it a little bit more sporty. This is one of the best everyday watches that Rolex offers. In fact, we have quite a few clients that own this watch that also own full gold Rolexes and other brands as well. And they just wear this every single day. It's not something they worry about as much as they do when they wear their gold watches. So they prefer to have something on their wrist that's not worth as much. Something that's okay to polish up, because obviously this one also features a full brushed bracelet, which means it's really easy to polish. So yeah, it's a fantastic everyday wearing watch. I think this is the first of the watches that we looked at so far in our little lineup of the previous 3 watches. This is the first one that's kind of regarded with a little bit more respect than the other 2. That's much more popular in the collection than the other 3 that we mentioned. And for that reason, this piece would be much easier to sell as well. Next is the Datejust 36. This is also one of those watches that's more easier to sell if you were to have looked to sell this watch. And it's much more popular. The Datejust series is much more popular than the Explorer and the Air King and the Oyster Perpetual. The Datejust has been a staple in the Rolex collection for many years, so it's probably one of their most famous watches. So in at £4,900, this watch features a full steel case and bracelet, and this watch actually features a full polished case with polished center links on the bracelet. So it's a much more dressy look to the piece. You can also get this watch with a Jubilee bracelet, which adds a much more dressy appearance to the piece. Changes up the look quite a lot, and that's an extra £50, so £4,950. I personally prefer this watch on the Oyster bracelet. And the reason for that is because of the smooth or domed bezel that this one has for the steel version. I think that goes better with just the plain Oyster bracelet. I think the Jubilee, you really need the fluted bezel to kind of match and complement the watch case. The date function on this watch is extremely useful. All of the watches that we've looked at before this one don't feature any other complications other than just a 3-hand design. I think the best options for this one is the white dial, the black dial, and the blue dial. I think probably the blue dial for me is the winner. I love that, again, sunburst style. I think it looks great on this watch, and it just really adds like a cool, unique accent. But for wearability wise, I think the white is probably the best option for versatility. You can wear white with pretty much anything. The black can sometimes look a little bit harsh with stuff, so with what you're wearing, so sometimes the white is the best option to go for versatility. Personally, I miss the fluted bezel on a Datejust. I think that is what the Datejust is about. So for me, I would be tempted to try and push my budget as much as I could to go up to the fluted bezel, which means going for steel and white gold, because for me that's just iconic Datejust. But the smooth bezel is, a nice option. It definitely has a classic look to the piece. It's very understated, much more so than the fluted bezel. Next watch is the 41mm Datejust. Again, also in Oyster steel. and this features again the same smooth bezel. I think this is a really great piece in Rolex collection. It's becoming much more popular now as well. The variations that I'd have in this watch would be the blue dial, or the white dial, or the black dial. For me, the blue dial is probably one of the best ones. Again, same as the 36mm, I just love that blue pop and that sunburst effect. I think it works really well on these steel Datejusts. I find the proportions on the 41mm are much better than the 36, even though the 36 is the original Datejust. I just much prefer the look on the wrist of the 41mm versus the 36. And this watch comes in at £5,450. Next watch for the exact same money of £5,450 is the No Date Submariner. This is an absolutely iconic watch in the Rolex collection. It's true to the original Submariner without the date function. It's a very classic watch. It will never go out of fashion, this watch. That's the great thing about a lot of these steel Rolexes that we're looking at. These entry-level watches are kind of staples in the Rolex collection. And that's why there's so many brilliant options for people to get into a Rolex and have some fantastic options at the lower end of the price range in the collection. The no date sub is actually quite rare as well. There's not many around. Rolex doesn't make as many of those as they do the date version because the date's just a little bit more popular. If you can buy this watch at the retail price, then you're a very happy person, because this watch will be worth much more than that retail price the moment you walk out the boutique. These are very difficult to get, and people are willing to spend a big premium. People who really appreciate the original Submariners, the purists, will usually go for this one over the date version. The only thing that's a little bit of a drawback about this one versus the date version is that the market for these ones, the no date versions, are much more limited than the date version. The date version is a much more popular watch, and the no date versions of the Submariner tend to not sell as easily. If your budget can stretch this watch, then it speaks for itself. It's an absolute icon in the Rolex collection, and it's a brilliant piece. Next, at £5,950, we have the Explorer 2. And for me, this watch has to be in the white dial. I think that's just like iconic Explorer for me, the Explorer 2. I personally prefer the older, smaller version of this watch, the 40mm version, but the 42mm is also quite a cool piece. This is a fantastic watch for everyday wear. Again, you've got your full brushed bracelet, like we saw on the Submariner and a few other watches as well in the lineup we've looked at. And that makes for a brilliant everyday wearer. It's steel, so it doesn't scratch as easily. It's brushed, which means it can be easily polished, and also scratches don't show up as easily as they do on polished bracelets. I love the brushed bezel on this watch. I think it adds a really cool accent to the piece. No other watches in the Rolex collection have this, so it's definitely unique in that sense. Personally, I think the Explorer is so much watch for the money. I think it's a great looking watch, and you definitely cannot go wrong with this piece. Next is £6,200, and that is the Rolex Gmt in steel. That's a great watch, also absolutely iconic in the Rolex collection. And the only thing that I'd say about this piece versus the other watches that we've looked at so far is that this one features polished center links on the bracelet, and also the clasp is polished as well. And that means that it's much easier to scratch. It becomes a bit more of a scratch magnet versus the brushed finish that we've seen on the Explorer, the No Date Sub, and a couple of the other watches as well. So in terms of daily wear, this watch isn't as good as the brushed watches. So, you know, if you don't mind scratches, then it's okay. The good thing about a polished center link bracelet is that it looks much more smarter, it looks much dressier, and that's probably why the Datejust has that polished center link, because it goes with the case, you know, the polished case, and a much more dressy version of a sports watch. If you can get the GMT at retail price, then you will be a very happy person, because that watch is selling for over retail price now in the used market. This watch will always go up in value as well. It's a classic staple piece in the Rolex collection. It's an absolute iconic piece, and it's just a great everyday wearer. It suits pretty much any size wrist. I've seen it on lots of girls that wear it, and it looks fantastic on them. And I've also seen it on plenty of guys that are massive and have huge wrists, and it looks fantastic on them as well. So it's an incredibly versatile watch. And then moving on to the next watch, which is pretty similar to this one, and that's the Submariner at £6,250. The Date Submariner is truly iconic in the Rolex collection. It's probably one of their best sellers, along with the Daytona. A fantastic piece, you cannot go wrong with this piece. Ceramic bezel like the GMT, full brushed bracelet and case, which means that it won't scratch as easily, or scratches won't show up as quickly as they do on polished. Fantastic everyday wear. It's probably one of the best everyday wear watches. And in fact, in my opinion, personally, I think it's probably the ultimate entry-level Rolex. If you can stretch your budget to that limit and get it for retail price, I don't think you can do better than a steel Submariner. Probably the ultimate version of that is the Hulk, the green one. I think if you can get one of those at retail price, then you're even happier than if you got the Submariner at retail price. I think that's a fantastic entry-level watch if you can afford that one. It's always going to be going up in value. It's a really cool piece, it's a cool take on a very classic Rolex. But either Submariner that you look at is amazing. The Submariner and the GMT kind of speak for themselves. So, you know, if you want to learn more about those watches, then go check out my reviews of those pieces. So my top 3 entry-level Rolexes under £6,000, because I feel that's the true sort of entry level. The first one is the 36mm Oyster Perpetual that we looked at first at £3,950. I think that is so much watch for the money. I think you really cannot go wrong with this piece. I think it suits everything. The white dial is fantastic. I love the white dial on this watch. It makes the watch pop a little bit more. It's very iconic Rolex. If you look back in time at the original Datejusts and day dates, etc., from the 50s and 60s, those were usually, or the gold versions were usually paired with a white dial or a very light colored dial to create that contrast. And for me, a white dial Rolex is just such a cool look. I love a white dial Rolex. All the dial options for this 36mm Oyster Perpetual are great, but my personal favorites are the white, the steel, and the black. I think the steel is a really cool, unique looking one, so probably I'd find it difficult to choose between the white and the steel, but maybe I'd probably personally lean towards the white, but the steel is a really cool looking piece as well. The second watch that I think is a great entry level Rolex is either the Air King or the Explorer 1. Personally, as I mentioned before, I prefer the Explorer 1 in terms of just this more subtle look, slightly less busy dial. I think it's one of the best everyday watches you can buy. Both these watches feature full brushed bracelets. Again, as I mentioned before a million times, great for everyday wear. Both cases are really nice on these watches. The Explorer 1 just a little bit more elegant and a little bit more subtle, and a slightly smaller case size as well. And then number 3 is the Datejust 41 with either the blue dial or the black dial, the white dial, but there's tons of options for dials on that watch and they all look great. But personally, I think probably the best one is the blue dial. The darker dial helps to make that watch look not so large, and it's just a really cool look blue with the steel. It's becoming a very, very popular combo now, thinking about 5711, the extra thin from Audemars Piguet, and lots of Pateks also feature that same blue dial. And obviously the Sky Dweller in steel and white gold with the blue dial. So yeah, the blue dial steel watch is becoming increasingly popular and has been for a little while, so you never ever can go wrong with a steel and blue dial watch. And this Datejust is priced in at £5,450. Personally, my favourite of all 3 is definitely the 36mm Oyster Perpetual. Fantastic watch, been in the collection for many, many years, and I think the new dials that we got this year are really cool. And it just so happens to be the most affordable watch that I had in our little lineup, so even better at £3,950. Thanks guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up and comment what you thought of this video. Maybe you have some other watches in there that you'd like to add, maybe some pieces that I left out. What would you choose if you were entry level into the Rolex collection? Maybe you'd pick something much higher than these, higher priced, or maybe you'd pick something lower priced. Let us know in the comments.